Welcome back, super awesome English nerds, to part 2 of A Home in Fiction by Geraldine Brooks, which is part of our Craft of Writing series. In part 2, we're going to look at a closer analysis of the text, looking at textual examples and how those examples help to create an effective, reflective piece of writing. So in part 1 of A Home in Fiction, we looked at what makes a reflective text. We looked at a little bit of the author's context, and then I left you to complete an activity identifying the elements of reflection within the text, where you needed to look backwards, inwards, forwards, and outwards at Geraldine Brooks and her approach to writing. I then asked you to go and listen or read the text and have a look at some of the comprehension questions that were in the margin of your booklet with the hard copy transcript of the lecture. So now we're going to move on to some closer examples, looking at closer examples of the text. Okay, so the first example we're going to look at can be found in paragraph 2 of the transcript, and I'm just going to read out the example and then we can analyse. I could imagine for a moment what it was to see with her eyes, to feel with her heart, to inhabit a space in which the language was not particular and national, but infant and universal. So what we have to begin with is a turning up sentence. So I've talked to you a little bit before about types of sentences, and this is an example of a 2, 2, and 2 sentence. So what that means is, if you look at the example here, she says, what it was to see with her eyes, to feel with her heart, to inhabit a space. So 2, 2, and 2. And what that does is it just enhances the description of the writing, makes it a little bit more intense. And that is also supported with the fact that they have used a tricolon here. So Brooks has used the eyes, the heart, and the space. So to feel with her, to see with her eyes, to feel with her heart, to inhabit a space. So the tricolon enhances the comment she's making here. She's saying that this is a moment of real reflection where she really thinks about what somebody else is considering and contemplating and is transported to her mind and to her way of looking at the world. The second example we're going to have a look at is one of my favourites in the entire text. I think the imagery that she uses here is absolutely stunning, and it's so balanced in her writing. So let's have a look. If she has lungs, I have gills. I swim in a sea of words. They flow around me and through me, and by a process that is not fully clear to me, some delicate hidden membrane draws forth the stuff that is necessary condition of my life. So she's comparing herself here to the mathematician, and she's saying that if the mathematician has lungs, she has gills. So they're a completely different species. That's the metaphor that's being created there. They're a completely different species. One is maths-minded, the other is English-minded. But what she does say is she swims in a sea of words and they flow around her and through her. And that's what makes her understand life more. Language makes her she's awoken by language in life. So we have the personification here of the words themselves. They flow around me and through me. So personifying language highlights the importance of it in this writer's life. And we're saying, the title of the text is A Home in Fiction, and that's what she's saying. Within her life, within her physical body, within her home, language is part of all of that. It's the membrane of her life. Without language, she would not be what she is. It is her human condition to love language. Now, the purpose of Craft of Writing and looking at some of these texts is to mimic the style of exemplar writers and apply that to our own writing. So the next example is one that I wanted to show you that more looks at a clever way of structuring sentences. So even if you're not the strongest writer, there are little tricks and tips you can do to add more depth to your writing. So we talked about turning up sentences before when I discussed the 2, 2, and 2 sentence in the first example. Now we're going to look at another type of turned up sentence. This is called the so-so sentence. So the example is, I would not be able to swim so far, dive so deep. Now it's very simple. She's just used the word so far, so deep to enhance the description, the imagery of the writing. It's a really simple little trick that you can do, but as you can see, it makes her writing flow and seem more emotional, more reflective. And as a reflective piece of writing, this is very important. One of the great things about reflective writing is that you can be a little bit impersonal in terms of the form of writing and the tone. So in the example you'll see here, there's almost a conversational element because she's discussing her feelings. So whilst this text is reflective, it's also discursive in that she is discussing the process of writing and how people feel about their lives. So the previous paragraph, she says that Henry David Thoreau wrote that the youth gets together his materials to build a bridge to the moon, or perchance a place or a temple on the earth, and at length the middle-aged man concludes to build a woodshed with them. So basically the youth dream and the middle-aged are practical. And so she's having this discussion, this discursive discussion, and she's reflecting upon her own thoughts in relation to writing and her desire to be a writer. So remember that she started out as a journalist and then became a novelist. And this was her discussion or her thoughts on that. Well, it did not go that way for me. I started out hoping for the woodshed, a nice, tight, serviceable structure that would serve a modestly useful purpose. So what she was saying is that she didn't originally dream big with her writing. She wanted a career that would sustain her, that would be financially dependable, modest, that she'd be happy with, a serviceable structure. And instead she's discussing and reflecting on how that has changed. So originally she just wanted a stable career. What she has come to find now is that she wants the world. She wants to build the temple on earth that Thoreau mentions in his quote. So that conversational tone can be found in both discursive and reflective styles of writing, and this is a really good example of it. Well, it did not go that way for me. Very conversational. So just looking again at how reflective language and discussion or discursive language can appear in texts like A Home in Fiction. Here's another example. So it's from the same paragraph where she's discussing the temple versus the woodshed and that desire for young people to reach the greatest dreams and for middle-aged people to be more practical. By the end of the paragraph, so she's gone through and she's discussed the journey of her writing and she's reflected back on the past and she's looking into the present. And she's, I guess, moved her way through her feelings towards being a writer. And now she says, now as a fiction writer, my ambition has slipped all reasonable bounds. Now in middle age, I aspire to build that bridge to the moon. And by the end of the paragraph, she's saying, by now, the toolbox has grown quite heavy, and some of the first acquired implements continue to be the most useful of my craft. So what she's saying there, first of all, she's using that repetitive now as a fiction writer, now in middle age, and then by now the toolbox has grown. So repetition can be a really good way of discussing, analysing, being persuasive as well. So it's not a technique just for one type of text writing. But there's also a really strong metaphor here. So she's talked about the fact that all the skills she's acquired as a writer, both as a dreamer and as a practical, hardworking journalist, have made her the writer she is today. And what the metaphor here is that her skills are like a worker's tool belt. They're heavy and they're vast, but the ones acquired first and the ones that are acquired last are still equally as important. And so I guess it's an exploration of the growth of her career. And if you were writing reflectively, you might look at an exploration of the growth of a text or how something has changed over a period of reading or exploring or writing. If you're looking at reflective for yourself, it might be how your opinion has evolved or changed. If you're discussing, you might look at how writers view the process of writing very differently here. So she looks at every experience as being one that makes her the writer she is, whereas other people might look at her previous career as a journalist and say she's too factual, she can't be a imaginative writer in that sense. Okay, moving on to another example now, we're going to look at the impact of metaphor in Brooks's work. So she uses a lot of extended metaphor throughout the writing to discuss the process of crafting writing and the transformation of the way she viewed her writing as a journalist to a published fictional author. So one of the examples was in paragraph 12. Writing may aspire to art, but it begins as craft. Words are stones and the book is a well. You choose each stone with consideration, you place it with effort. Sometimes you find just the right stone, the right shape. So we have this nice extended metaphor here about talking about crafting words and writing as a building process. And we looked in previous examples at how the dreamer builds the temple, the realist builds the woodshed. And so what she's talking about is writing aspires to be art, but to create art, you must first have this craft. So what she's saying is that writing is a craft. It is a skill, it is a trade, and you have to learn that craft before you can turn it into something beautiful. So metaphor is very powerful and can be used in any form of writing, not just the reflective type that we're looking at here. But the way she does it is so considered, and I want you to think about how you can craft metaphor in your own writing. When it comes to looking at texts that are persuasive, reflective, or discursive, the whole point is to get to a particular side. So whether you're reflecting, you're looking at the journey from one place to another. If you're being discursive, you're trying to wrestle with all the possible points and ideas. And if you're being persuasive, you are trying to convince somebody of one particular point of view or argument. Now, if we look at the last paragraph of Brooks's writing, we see here that she starts with a declarative sentence or a declarative statement. And what that means is she is declaring something. She is saying, this is what I think. And then she is following that up with a conclusive, reflective statement. So I want to show you the example here. But I believe that consciousness isn't shaped by things. You can move the furniture about as much as you like. The emotion of the people in the room will not change. Consciousness is shaped by fear and joy, hatred and tenderness. This is what I know. They loved as I love, and that is as good as a starting point as any. So a really powerful ending. Lots that can be pulled out there, but the first thing to look at is that declarative sentence. But I believe that. So she is stating her point. She has looked at the process of writing. She's reflected upon the journey of her own writing. She's looked at how other people have made her think about crafting writing and shaping the world. She has then reflected on it again by making these sort of metaphors towards the room and the furniture and talking about how the furniture can change, but the people's emotions don't. And then she uses these really great binaries of fear and joy, hatred and tenderness as well. So a really great ending, and it's very powerful. She starts with a sizzling start and a banging ending, and that's what I want you to think about in your own writing. How can you wrap up what you're trying to say, what you're trying to craft, into one really powerful statement at the end that will make your readers and your markers think? So if you haven't already, I would like you to now look at a deeper thinking or a deeper understanding of the text. I want you to go back and complete the 14 questions that were along the margins of the lecture transcript on page 46 of your workbooks. If you have completed those already, you might want to go back and add a few extra little thoughts after listening to part 2 of A Home in Fiction. And then I want you to move on to layers of text, the worksheet on page 53. So starting to look at different layers within her writing. And we talked a little bit about this throughout part 2 of this mini lecture series. So that might help you to answer some of the questions. Now, moving on to the final activity, I would like you to spend some time just really thinking about what Brooks was saying in A Home in Fiction. And in 300 words, I want you to explain what you have learned about the world of writing from this text. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and that you gained a little bit more knowledge about Geraldine Brooks, her writing, her style, and also maybe some little hints and tricks for your own craft of writing. Thank you, super awesome English nerds, for joining me for part 2 of A Home in Fiction, which is part of the Craft of Writing series. Email me if you have any questions or get in contact via my website, and I will be happy to help.